What is up? My name is Tim Bennix, and in this video or talk, because I spoke about this at a conference, we're going to talk about the modern technical stack and how you can build it in a way that both developers and content editors are very happy with that tech stack, and to make sure you don't ever have to like re-platform again. You just add things and remove things and everything feels like kind of in harmony, and developers can actually do what they want to do, which is build great apps rather than deal with this architecture that doesn't scale and then helping content editors because they cannot do what they want. And let's just talk about it, right? So let's first have a look at what that modern tech stack that we're dealing with right now actually looks like. But then also why I think our current approach doesn't really scale. So basically, you are the composer of your stack, right? You generally, as the architect or the developer, you tend to choose. And what you do nowadays is you just look around you and say, hey, that's a great CMS. That's a great e-commerce. That's a great digital asset management. That's a great analytics. Let's put them together, right? So you choose multiple vendors, put them together. And then actually doing that, combining them, doesn't automatically mean that you're going to get a great result. You have just meshed them together somehow. And so at scale, when you get a bit more of a successful project that's bigger, you're going to see a lot of issues. And so let's just have a look at how generally people choose to make one of these stacks architectures. So we tend to start with our CMS. And so I decided to just use Storyblock, one of my favorites, right? And then you choose a front end. Nuxt, one of my favorites again. Of course, this can be anything. It's just to illustrate the example. So basically, you have to connect these up. Then maybe when you scale, you want to have your images served from one place that serves them really, really well. Or have digital asset management where your media has its source. Well, if you add that, it needs to kind of connect to the front end and to your CMS, because some items might be in your CMS that need to be then linked to your digital asset management, right? And then when you scale, you probably need some search. You're going to need something like Algolia to index all your information to do really hyper-fast search results or filtering, things like that. That, of course, needs to be connected to all the things. And like I said, this is e-commerce, right? So let's choose Shopify or whatever, BigCommerce, anything works. Of course, that needs to be connected to all the things as well, because maybe in your CMS, you want to get some products and then show them on a page. Maybe you want to have all your images from the products go into your digital asset management. Maybe you want to index all the products in your search engine, so searching is much faster and easier. The same everywhere, right? And you need analytics. And then we haven't even spoken about hosting, which is, for example, Netlify in this case. And that needs to be connected with a whole bunch of things. It can be a connection to your Git repository. So when you change something, a build occurs. But maybe you want to do something with webhooks as well, right? And then so all the changes you might do go to Netlify. And then you can see here, I added HubSpot, because when you grow, you need to know more information about your users. And maybe you want to send them email campaigns or have sign-up forms or newsletters and things like that. So let's connect everything there as well. And you can see how many connections are happening right now, right? You need your analytics to go into HubSpot to figure out, hey, what's the segment of people that use my website so I can do something with that, right? And now you are so successful, let's branch into another continent. But there we tend to use different CMS systems. Well, let's just add a CMS. Why not, right? Maybe we have a global instance and a local instance. But that then also needs to be connected to all the things to be able to work. Multi-tenant is pretty complicated. So you can see the web we have just created. And all of this, these connections are kind of connected with something I like to call glue code. You kind of glue them all together like having Lego pieces. You put them on, but you put like really hot glue in between them, so it kind of just sticks. I dare you to switch one of these things out and still be operational and do it fast. That's going to be very challenging, right? And so essentially developers are going to be like this. You're going to just be vacuuming a fire. And this is an actual Dyson commercial from the 90s, which is kind of fun. Anyways, you kind of wanted to create this because every greenfield project that you do will kind of look like this because that's what you want. But then over time, it becomes this. And of course, you didn't want that. But there are multiple forces at play, from product owners to CTOs to CEOs to agencies, everybody wants something from you. And it becomes this over time because you haven't actually set up a way to orchestrate, to organize how these things connect together. You've actually hard coupled these things into one another. And so I like to call this exponential integration. So the more components you add to the system, the less effective you are at integrating them. And these are basically just fancy words for a complete dumpster fire that you throw in the bin and then in 2 years you'll rebuild. But wasn't the composable idea that that never would happen? So we have this whole modern thing, and there's actually something wrong here. It's really hard to do this. And not everybody is like Netflix or Facebook or like have these huge teams that are organized to madness. We need to normalize this for everybody. So basically, we talked about all the tech stuff, all the stuff that's hard to integrate, how to deal with that. But we actually forgot a very important part, which is your content editors. Because when this lovely Greenfield project is now live, right? And you have content editors like, let's do this. Let's make some new campaigns. Let's do some personalization. Let's just make this thing worth it. We're going to do storytelling so we can sell more, right? But then after a month or two, they're like, what the heck is this? All these systems I have to understand, and it's so abstract because when I have to integrate when I make a page, let's say, I'm going to grab stuff from all these different sources, but I don't understand what these sources do. And I have to learn how they work and I have to go into them and add it there. And then you have different teams not understanding all this. It's super abstract. And how does it work with the preview? If I wanted to do personalization across these sources, how do I do that? How do I actually make a deploy work? How do I make rules and regulations of access rules of who can publish what in all these systems? It's madness. And then after 6 months, they're just going to be burned and like this. And they'll be let me just do what I can, throw the towel in the ring, and we'll just wait for a rebuild in 2-3 years, right? This is not a place you want to be at. And you know what? A lot of projects I worked on have this. I'm inclined to say that all of them have this. That's not what we want, right? So now what? And this is one of my favorite slides because this is actually in Finding Nemo where they finally escape from their aquarium, but they're all in individual baggies. Okay, so now what? Well, there is a solution to this, and it's very new, and it's called digital experience composition. So you're composing your digital experience in a way that helps you to organize your stuff, right? For both developers, but also marketers and data analysts, content editors, the whole group. Because the whole group together makes it a success. And so we have yet another fancy acronym, DXC. Remember that one. So basically, when you use DXC, you're on the left side. And if you haven't used it yet or haven't started implementing, you're kind of on the right side. And you know what? The guy is cool. He'll deal with it. But what happens when he's on holiday or when he quits his job? That's problematic, right? You kind of want the left one. So let's talk about how the composition of a page actually works. So let's go to the drawing board. This is your page. Let's add a hero component. So this hero component probably comes from some CMS entry somewhere. And the image comes from your digital asset management. Well, then let's say we make another little component that is actually based on a search result from Algolia recommend, based on whatever the user has been doing on your website. Then let's add another one that is actually with the image, again, from your Cloudinary DAM, but that is actually product copy. So you can see how many different items are actually on this page that are connected somehow. And their data lives in certain places. And it should live there because that data is clean. You can use that next year. That data is solid, right? But how is that page built? Well, normally you would do that in your CMS somehow to compose that page. And then in your front end, you just query all the things and hope it all works out, but it's not super flexible. There are some solutions out there like, Prismic, Storyblock. They kind of all have this approach, but it's quite vendor locked in. You have to do it their way. And so with DXC, you get this. There's going to be a layer in between these things. The integrations go into the DXC. And then the front end queries the DXC. to be able to get the data. And this looks like simple data aggregation, right? But it's more, because a DXC is a bigger approach to this problem. So what you get is universal preview. If you just use the DXC's SDK, the preview will be across all these sources, and webhooks will be flying around. So if you change something in a source, your preview will happen directly. And you can preview in your preview environment that you built, or just your live site, whatever. You get complete freedom to choose the technical stack that you want. Like I chose Nux because I like it, but I don't have to. You can do anything. Then, because you have all the sources in one place, it's much easier to do personalization. You can actually do a specific hero component with a specific image and a specific search result based on something a user does, without actually having to do anything with these sources or in your code specifically. The DXC takes care of that. And then, because DXC is bigger than just data aggregation and API layers, it offers you a no-code editor that helps you to, in that preview, actually edit your page. So more about how all that works later. One thing that's very important here to discuss is the fact that this is a paradigm change of how we create pages, right? There's a different separation of concerns of your data. And what I like to call how to do that is you have your domain data versus your design data. And so domain data lives in a place that is basically the heart of where that has to live. Let's say you have an events website. So in your CMS, what you do is you model your events. That's it, right? So you have things like the venue for the event, the artist, the date, the location, the amount of visitors, the tickets, whatever. All that is data modeled in your CMS, and that's where that sits, because that's historical data that will always work. Next year, when you make an iPhone app, or when you make whatever, maybe there's like a sign that's digital in your venue, you need that data to show it, right? And so what we see all the time right now, because there's literally no solution out there, is that we mix that domain data with your design data. And design data is the stuff that is in context to your device. On this device, I'm showing something a certain way in that context, and that's my design data. For example, there's an event next week. We love it. It's a huge event. So that's going to be featured on the homepage, right? So you're going to get a big component with a hero, with that event, with like behind the scenes and a whole bunch of very interesting information about that event. And the rest of the event is just a little list below. Now, how would you do that in a traditional system? Well, you would likely go to your CMS, build a page, and then add some data to your events system where it says with a checkbox, it's featured now. And it has big letters or something like that, right? The fact that you do that is polluting your domain data, because what happens if that event shows up in a search result next week? It had the featured checkbox. It makes no sense for your search result, right? And next year, when you build another app, when you have piled up all this extra content in your data models, it's just a mess. You have to clean it up. You don't know why these connections are there. You don't know why these checkboxes or drop-downs are there. And so it makes very little sense. So think of it like this. Imagine you have 4 credit card providers that you use. And one of them you kind of prefer. You're not going to get and call the credit card companies that serve you that data to say, can you add a checkbox there because this one is more important than the other? These credit card companies couldn't care less. You wouldn't do it there. So why would you do it on your page composition? So what we are doing here with a DXC is that your page design, your composition of how something looks, and it doesn't have to be a page. It can be a chunk of something on a sign somewhere or in a bus stop or on a refrigerator. That composition is done in the DXC. And the DXC has components defined somehow. And normally it's like a JSON setup, and then you add resources to that from headless systems that the content editor can just pick and choose. This is a search result like that. This is that hero that comes from that CMS. That's that image. And so you're designing your pages in context of where they live without touching anything around it, because all that stuff around it, it's domain data, which you will use for all your omni-channel options, right? And we love to use this word omni-channel, but have you ever really seen it? It's really hard to do. And companies like Netflix have done it really, really well. I have it on my laptop, on my phone, on anywhere, like a Roku TV, whatever. You need to do the same thing and keep your data clean to be able to do that. And so that's where DXC comes in, right? So it's not just a data aggregation API that's easy. I query one thing and get all my data. It's actually a much bigger system, right? So let's have a look at some of the benefits for the developers out there. Like, let's explore a little. So let's talk about the front end. So because the data sits in the DXC, or at least it's connected there, your front-end components, your design system, whatever you have in Storybook, anything you build is completely agnostic from that data, right? So you are just building one channel with amazing components with the props that they need. The DXC or another team of developers will actually map the data to your components. So you just build the best thing, and that's what your content editors will work with in the DXC, and the data is mapped correctly through the DXC's SDK. So when you're more full stack, you're actually in charge of getting that data in, right, for the front end. If you have a DXC, whatever framework you choose, the way you query the things that you need, the DAM, the CMS, whatever, is always the same way, because the DXC has loosely coupled to that system, and it allows you just enough freedom to say, now I want to query it that way or that way, but it can help you. It can even cache it for you. You can kind of choose. It's quite agnostic, but it's always done the same way, which is very nice. But then also, you get the tools to map the data that you get from these different systems and map it to the props that your front-end components need. So these front-end components, again, know nothing. So you can make a little middleware where that all works. You can do it exactly like you need. And for every front-end application that you build, from your phone app to whatever, you can do that again. And then it gives you all this freedom, right? And so because there it's quite agnostic on what tech you use and how to use it, you can host it anywhere. You can go from a Jamstack SSG site to an SSR site where all the data comes from the CDN edge. You can host it yourself on any box in Heroku, probably not Heroku anymore, but you know what I mean. You can kind of choose. And so as developers, with this in place, you get to work on the stuff that you want to work on, rather than having to constantly ask content editors how to deal with stuff. Like, I've had it many times. New website released. I'm working on version 1.1 next sprint. Content editor calls me, I need a campaign tomorrow. Can you add these things on a page? I'm like, no, I'm too busy. And then everybody's upset. And then I will have to change the scope of my sprint to help out. Otherwise, why build a whole website that people cannot use or not understand? And they always can use it, but it's about the happiness of everyone to get a better project, right? So in the end, if you have less back and forth with these content editors and they are just empowered to do the stuff they need, you get to focus on the fun stuff, right? So let's talk about the Jamstack, because I think the Jamstack, in whatever form that exists right now, really works extremely well with all this. So basically, why would you use the Jamstack with this whole approach? So everything we deal with is API first now. There is no kind of central organ anywhere, right? The magic happens distributed. It's all on the CDN. It's decentralized. It's close to the user where stuff happens. There's no more origin of anything. And the lovely thing is that the Jamstack, even if it's like, statically rendered, or if it goes through some sort of edge handler or a serverless function, is by definition also decentralized. Things work on the CDN. You can scale it up on the CDN. You just put the files on more places. You just fire up more serverless functions. And these two go hand in hand so well that I think the Jamstack, even though it's changing a little bit, it's getting more SSR as we speak, it still works extremely well. So we talked a lot about the why, but we didn't really talk about how this should actually all connect. And so how it connects is using Uniform. And yes, I know, I work at Uniform. And this is the guy talking at a conference saying, I work here, use this. This is literally because there is no other platform to do this yet. So basically what you get is you have that page that we just constructed, right? Then you have this DXC called uniform. And so in that DXC, you make a few components, and these components are not code or anything. They're just JSON representations of the props your components might have. And they're attached to resources. And these resources go into the component, and you get to choose kind of which fields that you want to grab from these API calls and then populate your props, right? And you can do that with a whole bunch of components. You can make a lot. You can nest them. You can do things, whatever you want. And you can see there are different sources here. There's a CMS to grab one thing. You might grab an image, but you can also see this is Algolia here connected. You can actually configure a search query with multiple results that come back attached to this component. You can kind of loop them. And so all of this goes to the CDN edge. And I just chose Netlify here, but you can choose any. And then from that, it just renders your front end. And what is very interesting, if you, for example, use Nux 3 with its new Nitro engine, or Next 13 with its new approach to server components, you can actually run the whole app in a serverless function, and it deals with however it wants to render stuff. It can actually cache, pre-render, whatever SSR, all your stuff. And then if you wanted to do the personalization, you can use the edge functions that uniform helps you with. So what you could do is you can actually render an SSG page completely static, hyper fast, right? There's no queries there. It's just a page. But every page request goes through an edge function on the CDN. And in uniform, you can actually say this component has 4 variations based on some personalization. And then this edge function knows that. And based on the information a user gives, based on their location or cookies or session stuff, whatever, that edge function knows about the variations that it can show and just streams it in. Which means you're using edge functions to kind of change the output result of your static HTML page, which means highly dynamic pages in 50 milliseconds. Which is ridiculous. That's a whole new way of using edge functions, and it's very interesting. And the DXC helps you because in the no-code editor of, in this case, uniform, you can select all your personalization and you just hit publish. And then the SDK that you use to run uniform knows about all these things, right? So it renders anywhere you want. You could also say that whole next or next thing can just go into an edge function and render completely dynamically. It doesn't care. It just works. And so this would be a little interface demo where how it works as a content editor. So let's have a little look. So basically here, I'm selecting a rich text that actually comes from Prismic, one of my other favorite CMSs. And the content editor only knows it's Prismic because it has a little logo. And so now let's add another thing, which is basically just, let's make a list of things that come from Contentful. But I'm typing the title here. That's the design data, because that latest Turbo Tutorials line, it doesn't have to be in the CMS. And you can see here, I'm actually querying the latest items from my CMS and directly have it in there. And so you can do this with multiple things. And you can then also now say, let's personalize based on something. And it's very easy as a content editor to use this stuff. And so we now went from the stuff on the left, the big bundle of glue code and complicated, it's almost like a monster, right? And we went to something like this, where all your sources and all your tech go into this kind of orchestration middleware that the DXC offers, which then goes into this no-code interface, which has all these components set up. It all connects, and then it goes to anything that's the output. And you can see how much more organized this is and how easy it is to remove a CMS and add another one or change the search or whatever. It's basically just all taken care of in these layers. And so you can actually start small. If you have the thing on the left, you can go and slowly integrate that into the right. And that's kind of a safe path to move forward. We have had many customers do that. Works perfectly. So that's it. I want to thank you for watching. And see you soon. Cheers.